So how does it work? We implemented an application composition platform starting from a store perspective. So within the store, you can find over 2,500 business components to compose an application from. Those components are segmented over about 60 solution areas, just like CRM, WMS, finance, etc. And each of those components are models built in low-code. So they're not executable programs, but it's just a model that describes all aspects of that piece of software. So it says something about the GUI, about logic, process flows, about the data model, and eventually how it interacts with external applications through APIs. And I will just show you shortly an example of a component. So what you see here is the Novulo Architect, the low-code studio to build components. And it's pretty comparable to other low-code studios. And it means you have on the left a solution explorer. And in this case, we are looking at an electronic invoicing component. So this particular component only facilitates the process of having a sales invoice and to send it out to a customer through email, by PDF or XML or any other type of format. So it contains a module that shows you the invoice that needs to be sent. This is a part of the GUI builder, so you can just drag and drop it around. You have all the logic available, so which invoices are being showed here. We have the process builder, where you can just simply design the business process, and you have a data modeler, which is describing all the data relationships. So as far as you see it now, it's pretty comparable to other low-code studios. Where is it differentiating? So in this case, you can see here that every component is mapped on an enterprise architecture. And you can imagine that if you have a component, that you have dependencies. So we go back to our component. And for example, this component needs to have an invoice in order to be able to send it. Because if there is no invoice, we cannot send it out. And that invoice can be generated in SAP, can be generated in another ERP system, but it can also be generated in another component. Not one particular component, it doesn't matter, as long as the invoice has been implemented. So this component says, well, I do need an invoice and some properties of an invoice to work properly. And based on that invoice, I am adding some GUI elements and I'm adding some processes to the invoice in order to make it work. And that's actually been produced as well. So for example, the invoice status has been produced. So if another component wants to know whether the invoice has been sent, yes or no, this component will raise its hand and say, well, you can pick me to build your composition. And given that set of mapping on the architecture, we govern quality, architecture, and composability. So from that store, you can build your composition. And I will show you now how that works. So what you see here is an empty application. Pretty comparable by buying a phone in the store. So you have no business logic at all within this application. It's just something that you can log into. It will provide you some instructions, but business-wise, there is nothing to do. I can access the store, and within that store, I can access those 2,500 components, segmented over industries or solution areas, but I can also simply select invoicing to find a component related to invoicing. And over here you see the electronic invoicing component. And I can simply add the component to my cart. And after adding the component to the cart, I can search any further. And I may want to use some CRM functionality like leads and task management for the leads. And now I simply go to my cart and I see the components I just selected. But you can imagine that these three components will not provide a working application from itself. So it's been supported by an algorithm that helps you to compose and recommend additional components to build a full functional application. And that's also what we see here. So it will provide some recommendations. It will validate whether the composition is feasible, And after that, it will make a component weaving. So now we see that given these three components that I selected, I'm requiring a few additional components. And I may select alternatives. So it's not restricted to these components. If I don't like a particular component, I can switch it for an alternative, which is a very important feature of a composition platform. And if I like the set of components, I can just deploy it from here, and within 10 minutes, this application is ready to use. So what will happen from here? The particular components that I selected will be woven into an application model. So given those, let's say 30 components, they will be merged into one application model. And this is an example of an application model of the application that we are using internally. So this application consists of about 300 components to facilitate all our internal business processes. So it covers our CRM needs, it manages our campaigns, the website. We do have some purchase capabilities, many things related to time tracking, sprint planning, project planning, ticketing, knowledge base, finance, HR. So everything that we need to run our business is part of this composition. And the electronic invoicing is also part of this composition. And as you see now, it's been merged seamlessly into the application model. So what you see here is that if I click further, now the electronic invoicing is merged into the entire invoicing process, into the accounting process, into the credit management process, into the expected payments, everything that is related to it. And as an end user, you will not see the different components on itself. But underneath, all those references remain in place. So if I select a particular element, at any time, I can just trace the component and identify where it's come from. And based on this application model, we are building our application. So the next step is to transform this application model into a Microsoft .NET solution. So we are applying code generation from this model, and we can deploy it either on your own infrastructure as well as a cloud infrastructure. And the result is just let's say normal web application, but then very much tailored to your needs given your composition. So we go back to our application that we just started to compose, and we now see that it's been updated. So now our application has been updated. And after we relog in, we now have our leads and electronic invoicing functionality part of our application. We can just pin those functionalities to our home screen, and we have working functionality right from here. It has its validation in place. It integrates with the task management. I can convert my lead into an opportunity. And I can further configure my application given the related master data. So if I want to change anything to the opportunity phases, I can simply add a new phase. That will be available directly in our application. And at any point in time, when I think, well, I may miss something, I can simply go to the store and select other components that I can add to my composition. And if I would like to, I simply add a general ledger to my application and recompose my application and use it in about 5 minutes. The validations and recommendations have been executed, and I can deploy it. So that's what you see into this overview, that during usage I can go back to composition, add new components, I can update components when modifications have been made, I can replace components by a substitute and redeploy my application. It also fully supports development and test and acceptance environment. So if I go into production, I can use that in order to bring it there. And when I have needs that are not available on the shelf, then I can start building a new component. I will use the same Novulo Architect to build a new component from scratch or to build a substitute from an existing component. After building that component, some quality checks will be applied by Novulo, and after that you can decide either to make it a proprietary component or to publish it in the store. And by publishing it in the store, it will be available for others, and if others are using it, you will receive a kickback